Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we are finally going to be talking about the sophomore album from AlunaGeorge called I Remember. But first, let's talk a little bit about female vocals in modern pop music. Now, I recently had a conversation with one of my close friends, and she's kind of exasperated with so much of modern pop because, well, nearly every female singer is trying to imitate Rihanna, or at least a similar sort of mid-range, nasal, more husky tone. And really, I can't fault her for thinking that. But I did start thinking where that trend is actually coming from. After all, Rihanna's been around for over a decade on the radio, and yet this trend has been much closer to the forefront over the past couple of years, so what the hell's changed? Well, the argument could be that with the advent of autotune, less refined voices have been allowed to proliferate in the mainstream, but I think that's only a small part of the story. What's much more likely is that refinement in vocals goes in and out of style, just like any other trend. Right now, it's a lot more common to hear voices that have a little bit more of a rasp or a husky bite to them. Give it 5 years, and I predict we'll have another subset of angel voices dominating the radio, mark my words. So, okay, why bring any of this up? Well, in preparation for AlunaGeorge's sophomore album, I was struck by the odd contradiction of their sound. Vocals that were very clean and cooing, perhaps only a shade rougher than the pop princesses around the turn of the millennium, but production that was straight out of UK garage and modern deep house off-kilter electronica. It's not an entirely new phenomenon. 2 years before AlunaGeorge dropped Body Music, their debut album, Purity Ring dropped their debut, which was considerably stronger, but thanks to a fortuitous remix, AlunaGeorge actually got popular in the mainstream and was one of the main acts responsible for elevating DJ Snake to where he is now. As such, I was definitely curious to check out their sophomore album, I Remember. They delivered a pretty slick collection of R&B tinged electronic pop in 2014 that was pretty good, so what was their plan for 2016? Well, that's kind of tough to say, but that's more because I think I Remember by AlunaGeorge is kind of all over the place as an album. And the more I listen through it, the more I am absolutely convinced that they are not playing to their strengths as a duo. That, along with not having the immediate single to match You Know You Like It, might account for their shockingly low sales worldwide the first couple of weeks. Although, I will say AlunaGeorge do deserve a little bit more credit as a more creative and interesting act than you would normally expect, especially as songwriters. And hell, people keep giving Shawn Mendes money and pushing his albums to #1. So why can't we give AlunaGeorge more of a shot? They're better than him. Because on the surface, the basic ideas behind AlunaGeorge aren't that bad. I do wish Aluna's vocals are a little bit more distinct in comparison with everything else on the radio. That light, slightly raspy coo is everywhere these days, and you can tell that she's kind of playing to more of that sound with this album, but she does bring a little bit more forceful personality when she needs to, not nearly as fragile as some of her competition. Looking at you, Dea. Unfortunately, she's then often paired with pitch-shifted vocals that go both down and up into the chipmunk range, which I just can't stand. And considering how ubiquitous those sorts of vocal effects are on modern radio, it doesn't exactly lend to a distinctive presence for her. And then when you consider that twice on this album, the title track and especially on Wanderlust, the vocals are chopped into that YouTube poop-esque collage of sound that irritated me so damn much from Kiara's Gold earlier this year. I'm stuck wondering how much AlunaGeorge is going to chase current trends when it comes to their sound. And then you hear the rest of their instrumentation and production and you realize quite a bit. Now, let me give a little credit where it's due and say that George Reed's production, he anchors enough of it in real melody and doesn't feel the need to swamp out a lot of the tracks in reverb, which is good. But about midway through the third or fourth glassy synth and bass-driven tune with chilly, warping atmospheric effects and trap snares, I knew exactly what I was getting here. I wasn't all that surprised. It doesn't help that there were a fair few points on this album where the hook is less immediately memorable than the pre-chorus or post-chorus of the songs, like the bubbly groove on I'm in Control, or how the synths intensify throughout the back half of In My Head and really do save that song. And that's not counting the points where, instead of the deep house touches that characterized their first album, we instead get the tropical percussion and grooves of Hold Your Head High, or Jealous, or especially I'm in Control. Granted, none of it is outright bad, but considering how much that sound has monopolized the radio in 2016, I'm a little bit alarmed how little this sticks to my ear. But here's the bigger problem. We also get a selection of tracks like the hollow, melodic rollick of Not Above Love with some spikier synth lines, or the pretty guitar accented gloss of Mediator, or the jazz touch grooves on Heartbreak Horizons that sound imported from a turn-of-the-millennium pop R&B song, and surprise, surprise, the hooks are a lot stronger, they're more interesting, even if they can feel a tad overmixed with some of the horns. Hell, even though it's a little bit more warped and at a slightly slower tempo with the melodic royal on the low end, you can easily see the Missy Elliott influences coming through the team up with the female rappers Dreezy and Licky Kelly 47 on Me What I Mean. Again, that's a solid song. It's almost as if chasing fleeting trends doesn't highlight the unique melodic interplay and sharper edges and penchant attention for eclectic instrumentation that makes AlunaGeorge a natural fit for imitating the pop and R&B of the late 90s and early 2000s, instead of, say, jumping into an overcrowded scene where they barely rise above average. And nowhere is that more apparent than on the writing of this album, and where it's all the more evident that the more producer-driven side of electronica does AlunaGeorge no favors. They're more of a precise duo when it comes to their lyrics. They're trying to say more, and that's not exactly a comfortable fit for the increasingly broad strokes of tropical house or electronica. Whereas late 90s pop R&B, well, okay, some of the tracks might be lacking in that additional layer of complexity to really put them over the top. They're still more of a natural fit here. The biggest step towards depth on this album is the more political musings of My Blood, where she's observing that young people tended to be the muscle of social movements, but are often scapegoated and receive none of the rewards down the line. So if she is to engage with that sort of political movement, there needs to be something real to actually back it up. And that sort of assertion of control really runs through the rest of the album, be it from smothering or disingenuous relationships on Not Above Love or Jealous, or simply running free as single, be it on the breakup Heartbreak Horizon to the consent situation of Mean What I Mean. Frustratingly, nobody quite informed Pop can of that of I'm in Control, because all throughout the song where she's accepting her own sexual limits and putting them into action, he's still braying on his final bridge that he's the real boss. Way to miss the point, man. Granted, as for in control as she is, there are points where she can still be affected by emotion or old memories, like the title track, In My Head, or Not Above Love, solid examples of that. With the latter case just wanting some air in the situation, she's just kind of being smothered. And on songs like Mediator, she's sympathetic as the friend watching their relationship devolve from the sidelines. Overall, the writing actually is surprisingly decent for mainstream pop, but again, outside of My Blood, it's still playing to an easily digestible formula, particularly with songs like Hold Your Head High, which their standard self-esteem anthem in a slightly different package. And then In My Head, it's got all that cooing that really doesn't come to anything for a hook. It just feels like it's not even written there. So as a whole, I get why people wanted me to cover this album, but I also understand why it hasn't really caught fire on a bigger level, especially given that the single choice has emphasized songs that can easily fill and not challenge the mainstream. And I really do think that focus is a misstep for AlunaGeorge, particularly nowadays. Mostly because on a compositional level, when they ventured away, they got a little bit more rough-edged and interesting, albeit a little bit too cluttered for their own damn good. As a whole, I can't say I'm gonna remember a lot of this album if I'm being brutally honest with myself, but there are a few songs I liked and no obvious weak points. There's not a song here I would consider outright awful, even if the pitch shifting did kind of grate on my nerves. So as such, I'm thinking a very light 6 out of 10 and a recommendation if you're a fan. But really, you could turn the radio on right now and find songs very much like the majority of this album. Yes, it is competent, but it doesn't really stand out all that much. And with that, we'll see what happens. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. Like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Got the poll up here. I can imagine this review might be a little bit contentious, even though I don't think I've seen a single review for this record, but yeah, what did you guys think? Do you think it rose above some of the influences, or just kind of felt a little bit formless and generic, which ultimately kind of did feel like for me for about a good chunk of this album? Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I will try to give them a listen. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.
I'm not above now, so it's not like I